I want to, what I personally believe when you're having a consequential conversation, which we're about to do, I believe in thanking those who made it possible on the front end, in the middle, at the end. I do want to just recognize Breaking Code Silence and Think of Us. We mentioned Think of Us. I also want to thank the Annie A. Casey Foundation and the Eaton Workshop for doing this. I want to thank this guy up here, Darius, and Rodney right here. Rodney, stand up for a minute. Our American Sign Language interpreters, thank you so much for being here. And I want to welcome now our virtual audience and just welcome all of you, those who are in the room and those who are now watching online, as we hear very important lived experience voices from very many different dimensions of the troubled teen industry. And we're going to have up here on stage, I'm Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill, by the way, and I'd like to invite to the stage Paris Hilton. Paris, of course, is an entrepreneur, activist, and a survivor. She's a writer. She's been thinking deeply. We've just watched, for those of you who are not with us, who are online, a film clip of This is Paris, and it is very powerful. So Paris, why don't you just join us right here in that seat right here? And we have Sixto Castle. Sixto is a welfare system survivor. He's the founder and CEO of Think of Us. He and his team produced this very compelling book, Away from Home, Youth Experiences of Institutional Placements in Foster Care. If you're online, they can get it, right? If they're online, Sixto, get it, read it, it's extraordinary. 78 young people and their experiences. So we're going to have a little conversation, and then in a short bit, I'm going to invite some other survivors in this area. First of all, thank you both for doing this, sharing this, and thank you for your Washington Post op-ed, which ran, I think, 2 days ago, and it opened the eyes of many people in this town who didn't know this. And I'm going to start out for a moment, Paris, and ask you this. I've learned therapeutic boarding schools, military-style boot camps, juvenile justice facilities, behavior management programs, conversion camps. We were just talking to Megan Smith, the former Chief Technology Officer of the United States is here. We were talking about conversion camps, which it looked like that was one of the places that may have been similar to where you were at. There is an industry, and I just want to ask you about that. Beyond your experiences, you have these horrible experiences. How have you gone from that? And most people look at you as a powerful, beautiful, influential person. They don't understand the pain and trauma you went to, but how is that bridged to what you're calling an industry?
The trouble teen industry is a huge industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are thousands of schools, and they name themselves therapeutic boarding schools, but it's the exact opposite. There's wilderness camps. I attended 4 of these places, as you saw in the film, because I was just so terrified at all these places, and they were like cults, and the people who work at these places were abusive on a daily basis, verbally, mentally, psychologically, physically, and with a lot of my peers, even sexually. And just to be a child in that environment was terrifying. And it was so terrifying that I didn't even, when I got out of there, I didn't even want to think about it. I didn't want to talk about it. And that's why I kept it in for so many years. For over 2 decades, I didn't tell anyone the story because I just didn't even want to think that it was real. But, I'm so grateful to have done this film and to have told my story, because it's been the most healing experience of my life. And now to be making such a difference and helping others,
well, before I jump to
very gratifying.
Before I jump to Sixto and bring in your experience with a broader array of things, it does occur to me that what you showed and you talked about in the piece that you wrote for the Washington Post, that your parent, the facilities of the congregate care facilities at the U.S. border, when you look at just broadly throughout this network, we have a lot of people without resources, without powerful networks that are this. Can you talk to us about that shared experience?
My family had no idea. It's the same thing with every family. No parent would ever send their children to a place like this if they knew what happened behind closed doors. These places lie, they manipulate, they have brochures and websites with smiling kids and kids riding horses, and all of these pictures, they're not even taken at the facilities. They're conning and scamming families And I've spoken to a lot of families where they've had to put mortgages on their home. They've lost everything because they've put everything into these schools, and all they do is lie. And my parents are heartbroken. They're in shock. They're outraged, and they can't believe that there's people in the world that would lie and do this to children. So my mother is actually here with me in Washington, D.C., here to support, and she's been a huge support to the whole community. And she is like the voice of all the other parents, because this industry is torn apart way too many families.
Sixto, you become kind of the hub for this discussion in Washington, D.C., the troubled teen industry, the abuse that has gone on. And as I was just reading about your own experience with your brother, and we're going to have 3 other folks join us in a few minutes up here to share their lived experiences. I just would like to ask you to give, particularly our online audience who wasn't able to hear, just a taste of what you and your brother went through. I was just taken with the guilt that you felt. I couldn't believe you felt any guilt given that. And then what has animated you to the kind of unbelievable action that you've taken since that experience?
You know, Steve, I think one of the most interesting parts, I think one of the very interesting things is that, you know, what you see on stage is 2 different movements, right? There's the troubled teen movement, and then there's the foster care movement. And in this specific movement of foster care, we have the same exact problems and experiences that you just heard. And so I'll back up by saying the way I've come to this work is because I do have lived experience in foster care. Right. I had entered as an 11-month baby. At the age of 6, got to live with my biological mother. But by 7, I was back in the system. And then I was adopted. And that adoption was a pretty abusive and racist adoption. While the other kids got to go to a private school, because I was black, I was told I had to go to an actual public school. While they got to go to the amusement parks, I didn't get to do those things with them. They got to be in the family portraits and so forth. And I had to literally prove the abuse I was going through. At 13, I found myself couch surfing. And while I was couch surfing, I finally reconnected with some of my brothers and sisters. And it was because I had looked for them, found them. And my youngest brother was in a group home. And this is where I started.
And you were separated from him for years.
For years. The last time I had saw them, I was coming back into care at 7 years old. And so when I finally found my brother, it was an experience where, like you mentioned earlier, which is, you know, you would lose points and you couldn't be in the conversation with them. They would call me and tell me things like, oh, he misbehaved today. Can you tell him to listen to staff? And I had these experiences, and it really created a story in my head about how broken and how bad he was. Especially when I walked into facilities where not only do you see a police car with a label called Department of Children and Families, to think about a 14, 15-year-old going to visit their sibling they haven't seen in so long, and the first thing you see is a specialized police car outside of a facility just for folks inside, it made me believe for a very long time that he was the one who was the problem. But it's been out of the experiences of advocating in the system. I launched an organization called Think of Us. I've heard the stories of so many young people, and those specific stories really shed light. When I started this journey just 1 year ago, I came into this thinking that some young people might need to be in facilities. Mm-hmm. And after talking to 78 young people in our report Away from Home, after really understanding how untreated trauma manifests itself, right, that's what changed me.
There are over 120,000 people in congregate care, as I understand, more than that number, but that's a number that many use. I'm just interested. I'm going to ask Paris in a second. But what are the rules? What's the scaffolding? What's the, what are the, curtains and the stage of that experience? I mean, are there rules for that industry, or is it completely inconsistent across the board? What's the oversight? I mean, tell us the real picture there, because I want to put on the table that you're advocating for rules, you're advocating for standards, you're advocating for a frame and legislation. So I'd like to know what's there today, if anything.
Yeah, I'll back up by saying in the foster care system, 53% of all black families will experience a child abuse investigation. 8 million children a year are involved in a child abuse investigation. 85% of those actual claims are dismissed. So not only do we surveil black families more, but then we bring more black children in. And when the government brings them in, there's a big problem. Because there might be a shortage or a perceived shortage of foster homes in a state, then they're overutilizing facilities. So what you just heard was not a diagnosis, which is why we're taking this teenager and putting them in a facility. It's because the system has actually failed to have enough licensed home in some states. The system has failed to ask young people, is there a family member, a teacher, a church member that you can go live with? Let's get that home license and let's have you live there. When the system fails, then young people have to come in. And what we see is that once young people are there, once young people are in the system, are in these group homes, sometimes they don't leave until they age out.
I want to tell our audience that in Washington, D.C., and I'm sorry this is going to sound wonky to our online audience, but the Washington, D.C., if you want to change something, you have to have studies. You have to have reports. You have to have analysis. You have to have GAO reports. That's the Government Accountability Office. Wrote a report in 2008, and this was in Paris's op-ed, and it was called Residential Programs, Selected Cases of Death, Abuse, and Deceptive Marketing. Sounds like a very powerful report. And I have not read this report, but what I do know is very little happened afterward. And I want to ask Paris, from her piece that she wrote, tell us about the story of Cornelius Fredericks from Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Only one of the mics is working. That was just a heartbreaking story. Cornelius Fredericks, he was in the cafeteria and was restrained by 12 staff members, or 7 staff members for 12 minutes, and he died because of that, all because he threw a sandwich. It's just, and when you watch the video of it, it's just heartbreaking to see that everyone in the room is so used to this restraining and this abuse, and it's a constant thing that happens daily. I would see it happen maybe 10 or 15 times a day, where staff are not even trained properly and they are getting on top of a child. And it happens far too often. And if we had something to protect the children, where they had a Bill of Rights, Cornelius Fredericks would be alive today.
Well, I want to expand the conversation here with that sobering story. I appreciate it. I'm going to bring to the stage our friends Carolyn Cole. Carolyn, hopefully they're here. Carolyn Cole. I have Carolyn Cole. Carolyn is the congregate. She is a congregate care survivor. She's the director of government relations for the survivor-led nonprofit Breaking Code Silence, which of course is helping to support today's program. Carolyn, thank you so much. Alan Datcher is executive director of the Los Angeles County Youth Commission, the country's largest child welfare system. He and I were just trading Los Angeles stories. Elaine, it's great to see you. And we have Bobby Taylor. Bobby is a nonprofit consultant specializing in the child welfare sector and lived experience engagement. And there are other of you out here. I just want to just capture one thing for a quick moment. Many of you know each other. You've been in the same systems together. And Elaine, you two, Sixto, and you were in the same system together. Can you just comment on the circles that you continually met each other, some of you, in this system, and that in a way
that you see that there's a close-knit group of young people across the country who have experienced these systems, who are courageously speaking out, right, and who want to make a difference, who want to make a change.
And Bobby, you were also telling me that you were in the system with some of the folks here tonight, I think, or with Alan.
Yeah, I think it is about the proximity to lived experience. So I was actually in juvenile justice and foster care, but
right,
actually centered in Nebraska, not really in Connecticut or in LA, right? So I think our experience just connects us very deeply because we can relate to one another.
Well, let me ask you, because I think there are a lot of people online that are trying to understand, to have a bridge to that experience, and I'd just love to hear your stories in a sense. And I guess the challenge in anything like this when we're on stage is trying to help people understand what regularly happens. Not the boutique story, but what was the routine of the trauma, the routine of the horror, and as Paris Hilton described, the hell that she was in. and and we're going to get to the decision, the question of what we do to change it. But I just love people to understand the practiced, routine, routinized dimensions of this kind of trauma deployed against so many young people. Bobby?
Yeah, so I actually entered care through juvenile justice, right? And my primary offense to get into juvenile justice was not going to school. And so that was at the age of 12. And from 12 to 19, I would go from placement to placement to placement. And they even tried to send me home a few times, but they found out that they were actually sending me home to my abuser. And so from that point forward, I was considered a foster youth, but I never went home and I never went to a foster placement. And so, at 17, there was a point where I was just so tired of, being deprived of my freedom and deprived of normalcy that I would run away. And, when I ran away from the highest level of care in Nebraska, I was arrested 6 months later and actually taken to the county jail. And for 7 months, I lived in the county jail, and there was not one aspect of that facility that I had not already experienced through juvenile justice or foster care or any of the congregate placements that I had been in. And so, it's just really telling, and it's really ironic that the very system that they're trying to prevent us from going into is actually the system that they're conditioning us for since the first day that we enter care. Thank you. The day-to-day, I mean, if you've ever seen, what are those shows called where it's Scared Straight, right? And you walk in and it's a brick floor and it's brick walls and they're jail cells and they're talking to prisoners and they have like these correction officers that are running the facilities. Those are some of the same experiences that youth experience while they're in some of these placements. And so they really are carceral and they really are like jail.
Carolyn, I'd like to jump to you as well and have you share again, highlighting if you can, because I know you're all now. I mean, what's so amazing to me is that all of you are trying to change this. And let me just say, I guess I can say this. You're all really young, and you're all really pissed off, right? But I think it's very, very, it's amazing, but, we're going to get to the story of what did it take for you to be heard. I mean, part of that process is tonight. But Caroline, if you can share this, because I want, again, to kind of go in, where we're talking about refugees at the border, people coming into this country. Congregate care is a big tent, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to highlight for people, it's not just someone who wasn't going to school or had found these pattern experiences. There's something about power in my reading of his book and looking at of power and how it's used to demean and degrade and so much torment people who don't have power. But Caroline?
Excellent question. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you sure. Hello?
Is that hello?
There
Okay,
you go.
better. I think what we really need to understand about this industry and about these facilities is that they were born of this idea of aversive conditioning and behavior modification. And so that has really strong roots in conversion therapy and electroshock, right? And so back in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of experiments going on where they were hooking children up to electrodes. Right. And, almost like you imagine a dog with a shock collar, right? You do something bad, you're going to get shocked. And so the entire treatment model of these facilities is based off of, we are going to make this as painful and as grueling and as miserable for you as possible. And so, being in a facility, I was in a facility for 2.5 years, you would see new staff members come in and you would see them go through this transformation. They initially come in and they treat you like a human. And they look at you in the eyes and they talk to you with kindness. And then over the course of a month or two, slowly they're taught and groomed by other staff and upper management to not do that, or they would be fired, right? And so they have to be cold, they have to be harsh, they have to be inhuman to us. And that is the treatment. The abuse is the treatment. The abuse is the treatment. There's no way around that. And so, I mean, that's where we're at, is these were never meant to be therapeutic. These were never meant to be nice places that have just gone awry. That was the whole purpose and point of them.
I think one of the things
please
that's
say.
similar to, that I hear in similarities to the foster care industry, is that in the foster care industry, staff are so consumed with limiting liability that these rules come up. And what young people need is family and love, and to be loved past the contractual agreement. And so for so many teenagers in foster care, and so, as we are up here representing so many different sectors, like, we have this commonality, which is, it seems to me that we haven't figured out just yet how to treat untreated trauma. What is the path of healing for teenagers? And Alan, I know you have something to say, so I'm gonna pass it to you.
Alan, yeah, go ahead, Alan.
No. I mean, just on the heels of that, I do want to say that in this conversation, it's also important when we talk about trauma to center the families that, especially for Paris's mom and dad and my parents, right, who struggled with substance abuse, and myself and my siblings were removed from their home. We got to center them in this conversation, because that was also traumatic for our parents, right? And so we have to, address the myth of, well, if they're, bad kids, bad parents, this is the only way, right? The myth of, well, we have to institutionalize kids who are abused or neglected or unwanted. And I think that this sheds light on what society has allowed to happen, right? We've literally allowed young people to fend for themselves in these systems, out of sight, out of mind. Policymakers, right? You talked about that report from the GAO several years ago. What has happened to young people? And I think we're representing that up here.
Can you share with us a little of your story that happened? What got you into this industry? What you experienced to the degree you're comfortable?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, both of my parents struggled with substance abuse. I entered the foster care system at age 11, almost 12. And I remember the evening, similar to Sixto's point, it was both police and social workers together coming to remove myself and my siblings from our parents' home. At the time, my mother was in prison. And so my dad was our primary caregiver. And again, he struggled with substance abuse. And the first just days of going to a facility called McLaren Hall, which is, if you're on the West Coast or Los Angeles County, this facility. It was widespread for abuse and neglect of children, even as a facility to serve abused and neglected children. I remember being there the first night. It was like a prison. They asked us to change our clothes. We all got different colored clothing. I was separated from my siblings by age. So my age group, 10 to 13, were in one group. My two younger siblings, my older sibling, we were removed, and I didn't see them the entire time I was there. I remember vividly the pale blue uniform that they gave me. I remember lunchtime. I remember playtime. And it was a really sad and really difficult situation. And I remember just thinking, what did I do? Right? What did I do to be here? I want to see my brothers. Get me out of here. And I remember they allowed us one call per week. And so I was able to call my sister. And I just remember breaking down and saying, please come get me, my oldest sister, actually. And I remember saying, please come get us out of here by any means. We don't want to be here. Kind of leave them to their own devices in a lot of ways.
Paris, have you gone back to confront any of the institutions that did this to you?
Yes, right after the documentary came out, we met, and with hundreds of survivors, we went in Utah. We did a rally outside of Provo Canyon School. We were all holding up signs saying, the kids that you abuse today will take you down tomorrow. I see you, survivor, breaking code silence. And that really made a statement with them. And then I went back again.
Did they respond?
Oh, yeah, they lie and say we have new management since 2000, which I know isn't true because we have all the research, and the same people that were working there 20 years ago when I was there are still there. And they're actually one person in particular who got let go right after the film because they had to say that quote. I've talked to a lot of students who've left there, and that's what she would talk about all the time. She'd always say, Paris Hilton used to go here, and everyone thought it was like an urban legend. And then when the film came out, they realized she was telling the truth, and she would brag and tell to everyone, I broke Paris Hilton, and I would do this, and was bragging about it, which is also like a big HIPAA concern as well. You're not supposed to talk about people who've been there, but these places really enjoyed doing that.
Sixto, have you confronted any of your those that were in your journey?
You know, for me, my abuse was mainly from individuals. And a tall black man confronting a short white looking woman might not be in my favor. I'm just gonna say that. So, but what I would say,
I mean, it's important to put it out there. There's a race and power issue. It's
a real situation. But what I will say is that, you know, I launched Think of Us with trying to find solutions. And a lot of us in the organization have lived experience. We're proximate to the issues. We are ensuring that we talk to literally tens of thousands of young people through our applications, through our data, through the requests that they put through, so that we can address it, because we have to address not just the singular abuser, but the systemic problem that we're living within, and the conditions. The reason why people, no matter what industry you hear on the stage, that people are getting away with it is because we are not valued enough to have rights to be able to report it. I had to strap a tape recorder with actually clear tape to my chest to record the abuse I was going through, so that I can prove to a hotline, to a person on the other side, of what I was going through. And so until we have actual rights to be able to report something and to be able to actually bring something forward and there be a mandate to take that serious, we are going to continue to have people who are being traumatized, and specifically system-induced trauma.
And what would have happened had you been discovered recording?
Well, I was, and I got beaten.
Caroline, I'd just love to find out if you because all of you have found your way on this journey into doing, very bold and big things now. You have responsibilities as advisors, but you have government responsibilities now. I'm just interested in how you turned from your experience and finally getting someone to hear what you did and turning that into turning the tables. Caroline?
So for myself, it took a number of years. And actually, after I left the facility that I was at, and I had completed their program, I had graduated after 29 months of being there, and I, within 6 months, experienced homelessness for the first time out of twice in my life. I then went through 7 years of addiction and almost lost my life many times. I experienced domestic violence, because in these kinds of facilities, that's what they train you to endure. And so it was not a clear-cut path of me just waking up one day realizing I want to fight against the injustices that I experienced, right? Like, that wasn't it. In fact, it took compounded trauma.
Who I knew had also been involved in Los Angeles. And so about a week prior to me leaving McLaren Hall, we got notice that we're heading out, and I'm ecstatic. I'm looking forward to it. I have a bunkmate, and so I let my bunkmate know, hey, man, I'm finally getting out of here. The court has said that my sister can be our guardian. She's going to take us in. And I remember him just looking me in my face. And again, I'm 11, 12 years old. And he said, well, that's good for you, Alan, but I'm never leaving this place. And immediately, even in my, my happiness, as an 11-year-old, it just shook me. The level of despair that this young man had in that moment. And I just remember thinking, this can't happen. And I remember asking my sister, like, is there any possible way that you can add a person? And there was, and no. And so I think from there on, I remember his voice saying, I'm never leaving this place, in that despair, and saying, I have to do something with my life. I have to make my life and this experience matter in some way, shape, or form, because there's so many young people like that young man, like my bunkmate, that are still currently in these systems today.
Bobby, I'd love to hear from you as well. And you know, as you consult in this sector, so you deal with a lot of different parties. You know, Alan is, you know, I think running probably a big bureaucracy in Los Angeles. We'll have to talk about that later. But I mean, you've got a lot of people under your care, but you have an official government role. But consulting is really interesting because you see lots of different squares and circles and design. You know, I'm just interested as somebody out there in the field on the front end, given your experience, what do your clients most need to hear to get this right?
Oh, they need to hear the truth. And people with lived experience need to be loud. And we don't have time to be quiet because there's so many other young people that are currently in the system that are waiting for us to be the change that they are hoping for. We no longer have an opportunity to wish for someone else to come after us to make that change, right? And when I went to county jail and I realized that they had been conditioning me since the very first day at 12 years old, I knew that I would not let them forecast my future or tell me what I was going to do with my future. And so when I got out of the system, I was loud, and I got connected to community programs when poverty hit, and I realized I was going down these generational cycles. I found those programs. I was loud about how they treated me, and that led me to these relationships and more relationships where I would be in settings like this, being very, very loud. I remember, you know, staff from my previous group homes being in the crowd and me making direct eye contact and saying, you did this, and this is wrong on so many different levels and so many different reasons for so many different people. And I was able to confront them, but you know, I haven't made the drive out to, you know, the wilderness places that I've been to or the county jails. But I was able to confront some of the people that were in the group homes and in charge of my care.
Well, thank you for that. You know, I want to come back to 6 to Paris for a minute, but I'm going to read something here. Because part of tonight and part of your editorial op-ed that you wrote was to raise profile of what is happening in the congregate care industry, the troubled teen industry, but also to look at some things that can be done in this town. The Accountability for Congregate Care Act of 2021, I think Congressman Ro Khanna, he may be here, but I know he's going to be here tonight, but Congressman Khanna has been involved. Ro, if you're out there, he's a good friend of mine. I haven't seen him yet, but I'm also sight challenged in the back. So if you're back there, wave, take credit. But also a Youth in Congregate Care Bill of Rights. And I just want to just read a few of these. But it says, you know, those in congregate care should have the right to physical well-being, including to be free from abuse and neglect, including all forms of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, neglect, exploitation, financial exploitation, excessive medication, the right to be free from institutional abuse and neglect. That's just part one. I mean, the crimes that are in this are pretty extraordinary. To be free from aversive behavioral interventions, the freedom from physical, mechanical, and chemical restraint or seclusion. I'm just thinking about that 11-year-old boy that you were just talking about, your 8-year-old brother. Prohibition of long periods of forced silence, restriction of communication with staff, caregivers, child protective services, law enforcement, and advocates, to have sufficient educational and life skills imparted onto them, to reasonable daily access to the outdoors. But you know, there's some fairly graphic other prohibitions in here as well. And so I just want to ask the two of you, how is this being received? Because when people look at this list and say, oh my God, what's going on in this largely unregulated world? How can this happen? And what sorts of responses are you getting for an accountability act for this industry? Paris?
Well, first of all, when people see this, they're like, this is basic human rights. Like, it's heartbreaking and disgusting to even think that we even have to make rules like this. But unfortunately, it's so rampant in this industry that we had to put all of that in there. And you know, I wished that 20 years ago when I was at these places that we had these rules in place, because when you go into these places as a child, you have no human rights. Everything is taken away from you. You're cut off from the outside world. You can't stick up for yourself. You can't call anyone if something happens. When they send someone to go check on the place, they already have got a call, so they know the whole place changes. It's just, yeah. But people, everyone who's read it is in shock that we're doing this, because a lot of people were not aware of what's happening. But anyone who does hear about it says, I want to immediately be involved because children deserve to be safe and live in humane conditions and be treated like human beings. So everyone that I've spoke to is supporting this, and thank you so much, Sixto, and everyone who works with your organization. You all have been so supportive, and and thank you all for coming here tonight as well. Thank you guys.
Sixto, as you've been pushing and trying to raise the profile of one legislation and a Bill of Rights for young people in this, I'd just be interested in how you feel the response has been thus far.
You know, I have to say, to be authentic to who I am, there's a part of me that actually hurts in this process, because the reality is that we need to team up with a Paris Hilton to be able to be visible. Because it's not the first time that young people who've been in these situations have actually lifted up their voices. We've been saying this stuff.
Right.
We've been sharing our story. And it's taken this right here to happen, this type of partnership, so that then America, general America, can start to understand what is foster care, what is these facilities that are doing this type of harm. And so part of me hurts at that part, because I think there's so many young people, so many adults who went through something that they were never heard. And tonight, what was so unique, we sent out RSVP. And it's the number, we've had multiple town halls, events, you name it. And this event was the highest that lived experience, people who've been through this experience, has registered for. We know for a fact we have about 600-700 young people who are tuning in. And I want to say to you, this is our moment to actually be able to lift our voices, to tell the truth, to advocate, and to push, so that not only do we have the Bill of Rights, but that every time a child dies, that there is legislation and regulation that says we won't forget and that we will actually count that. And that doesn't exist right now.
No, I hope it's true. You know, when I was studying up and reading about this and read material, not just Paris's op-ed, but had gone back, and recently I met a judge who used to be in New York who was very committed to keeping kids out of the school to prison pipeline, and she talked about how isolated she was in that effort to try to keep kids from being incarcerated, that started this circle of foster care and whatnot. But there is a lot out there, and I think you're absolutely right, Sixto, that I think some of us have known it has gone on in the fringe, but we have just not looked at it. And I think we should all look at ourselves and ask why that is in an age when empathy and concern, mutual concern, should be much more than it is. So I just really want to credit all of you for doing this. I think the other dimension here, we was talking to Megan Smith again, who's on your board of Think of Us. Megan Smith is a very cool person. She made a comment. I may have gotten it wrong because she was whispering to me when cool stuff was going on the screen. But she was talking about how to bring tech into this. How can we do something with technology, knowing where people are at, creating accountability, getting the paperwork that is often lost or used, it just sounds what I think Megan was conveying to me is that part of the problem here in the mismanagement and the lack of accountability and oversight could be, in fact, solved by technology in a little bit. I'm just, Carolyn, you're excited about that. So tell me where you're at on that.
Yes, absolutely. I was about to, nod my head off. Yes. So one of the things that our organization has seen is that states are not tracking placements. They are not tracking incidents of abuse. And so that comes down to almost the individual caseworker, the individual social worker. And, I don't know about everyone here, but
I just want to underscore, you said states are not tracking abuse.
They are not in these institutions. And one of those reasons is because there is no centralized jurisdiction. There is no centralized reporting system. And so when you have a child, let's say if they're able to make a report, which oftentimes they don't even have access to a telephone, right? They don't have access to the outside world, but let's say that child does, and they are able to make that report and say, during a physical restraint, my arm was broken, or, I'm being over-medicated, someone please help me, I can't advocate for myself. That report can go to one of many different places. And oftentimes what happens is it falls onto law enforcement. And law enforcement does not have the skills or abilities to be able to even begin to investigate something like that. So what happens is they look at a report like that and they say, well, is someone injured? No. Okay. Case closed. Or a child reports being physically abused and they say, oh, you know what? There were no cameras in that room. Strange. Unsubstantiated. And it's forgotten. Right? And so because we have so many of these different avenues and no centralized place, leading back to this idea of technology being the solution, it really could be as simple as that. Right? And so what's happening in these facilities is that we're going off of the honor system. We're asking the facilities, are you taking care of these kids? And what are they saying? They're like,
sure.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing a great job. We're doing a great job.
We're one of the best.
Yeah.
We're not one of the bad guys, right? Those people out there are the bad guys. We're the good guys. We're doing it right. And that's the story every single time. But what happens when a child dies? What happens when a child dies and we look and we say, oh, they were actually trained, right? It's not working.
Yeah. Alan?
Well, I think, our process in LA is a little further upstream. I think, yes, technology is the tools and the resources, right? But we got to start with the people.
Right.
Right? The social workers, our attorneys, our judges, and ensure that at least we're all starting from a common place on what is child abuse, right? What is neglect? And then when we enter it into these systems, whether you are a person of means and it's just your parents putting you in one of these schools, or you are a foster youth or a juvenile justice youth, right, and you're going into these programs, I think we got to start with the people. And so one example that we did when I was still leading some work up in Oregon was we actually redesigned Oregon's child abuse reporting and response system. And we started with community members and young people, including parents who had their children removed from their homes,
right,
because they needed to be a part of the conversation. And they said, this is what it means to me when you build this new system. This is what it means to me when my child was removed from this home, right? And then we also started with young people that said, this is what I would love for a system to keep in mind when I'm at a group home and I need to call to report abuse that's happening to me or neglect, right? And so I think we have to highlight the people that are using these systems just as much as the technology.
So let me ask you a tough question. I want Bobby to weigh in on this as well. But have you read through the Accountability for Congregate Care Act?
To be quite honest, no.
Okay.
I didn't even know it existed.
It exists. It's here. Ro Economy, and I have a copy. I'll slip it to you later. Well, let me ask you a generic question about it, because in it tries to set standards. It tries to address some of the issues you just defined. And tell me if I'm wrong, Sixto, because I'm sure you have read it, right? Because your office gave it to me. I hope you read it. But I think that the broad side of it is you try and set standards. And as I understand it, the way it's written now, if it were to keep its teeth, that those institutions, those places, all of the congregate care realities out there that met these standards would continue to exist. Those that did not would be decertified and would not. And so that's where the rubber meets the road and you get, the kind of traction. And I'm just interested, just imagine that this is a really good bill, just trust me. If you were in Los Angeles with an area that you're kind of looking at, how many, I'd be interested in what percentage of congregate care facilities would survive?
Well, that's a tough question. And this is not to knock congregate care facilities in the aggregate, right? Not all congregate care facilities are horrible. I think what we're talking about is reimagining how we care for young people in general, whether you are justice impacted or not. So I want to start there. I think we have a federal law already in place that is actually doing some of that, and that's the Family First and Prevention Services Act, right? So that's actually setting those standards.
Right.
So I think that's much more important, and I couldn't tell you what the percentage of, but I could tell you that a lot of these facilities have power, have influence, have the ability to request that states delay the implementation of this law, and it's happening as we speak. And I'm sure we have several folks in the crowd that can attest to that.
And what I would say, though, when it comes down to family first, though, is that I don't want something to get very confused here, which is that children belong in family. And there are times when congregate care needs to be used. But where I stand and where I want to be very clear is that I believe that unnecessary use of institutions should be eliminated and should not be allowed.
Bobby,
Yeah.
I want you to respond to two things. Is one, the data question, the data, the tech, what your experience in this industry, how it could be cleaned up to a certain degree, whether or not, I just was shocked to hear that abuse is not, recorded. I mean, let me just say for everybody watching online, it's a little bit different, wrong man. Let me just tell you, FBI guys and police guys, Larry Nassar, Jim this, look, we've been through this story a lot, and lack of accountability will come get you, right? So anyway, Bobby, your thoughts on that, and then share with us a little bit about your thoughts on legal scaffolding and what needs to be there.
Well, I'll start with the legal scaffolding. I think that if it is not created with lived experience at the table, and if it is not created with the voices who have been impacted, then you can definitely go in the wrong direction unintentionally. And so without those voices to help guide that and what it should look like and what the actual outcome should be, I think unintentionally it could go the wrong way. I think we live in a world of technology, right? And so one of the wonderful things that Think of Us has been able to do is leverage technology by helping families, youth, and other populations navigate systems that have a bunch of information on community-based programs, right? I think we need to move towards how do we prevent from families or youth from even entering, a situation where they may be put in a foster home, where they may be put into a group home, right? And when you leverage technology to help families navigate it, because it's hard. There's thousands of different programs that are available, right? There's thousands of them. And when you call 10 different places and you don't get the answers you need, people give up and they continue to go through the same thing because they don't get the help that they need. But when you have someone helping you navigate through it and getting you directly to it, it makes a world of difference. It really does, and it changes the whole trajectory of where you could have been. And so when you do that with technology, I think that makes the world of difference.
Let me just, as we're in the final stretch here, Sixto, I want you to, and all of you in a moment, but Sixto, I want you to paint a picture for us. I can tell you're a conceptual person. You're an architect of, the future of what you want. I want to know what the world looks like without these institutions. What do you have instead of these institutions? How does the system? Because I think to succeed, I'm going to be honest, as a somewhat cynical journalist on a lot of things. To win this side, you're going to have to paint another picture. I often tell people in the policy space, when I was running think tanks and whatnot, your job is to come in and embarrass the bad decisions of government. That's kind of easy. The hard part is putting a better idea on the table. So what's the better idea, the better concept than these institutional horrors that we're hearing about today?
I'll start with accountability. Cornelius Fredericks was murdered. That is what happened. And the verdict just came out about a week ago or so. And one of the people involved has to pay a fine of $1,000. And to me, that's how much.
He threw a sandwich.
He threw a sandwich. He was restrained for 12 minutes. And to me, when I look at that black boy, to me it's like, is that what his life was worth, $1,000 fine? So for me, first is accountability. The second piece, in order for, at least in the foster care industry, 75% of teenagers who have had congregate care experience, their first actual placement was congregate care. So the first thing we need to be thinking about is how do we build in the licensing, the procedures, and streamline that piece so that when a young person comes into care and says, I have a church member, I have a coach, I have a teacher, I have an uncle, a grandparent, that we can place them there immediately. that we can do that piece. So I want to paint a picture where we're not just placing children with strangers, but that we are leveraging their family and the people that they know. That's number one. Number two, it's that when we do have to place young people with strangers, because there are wonderful strangers who have taken me in and have provided a home for me at certain points on my journey, right? That then we ensure that when there is unhealed trauma that is happening, that may have me talk back, because I used to talk back a lot, that there be some in-home services. You don't gotta ship me away to get me some support, right? And the 6 to 9 months to get access to mental health, to get the coaching, right, is not there. And so if we can go ahead and streamline the systems, processes, which is being done, right, so that we can be placed with families, so that we can get the supports in home, I want to see that. I want to lift up an example. Uplift Family Services was a congregate care setting in the Bay Area. And what they did was they actually reworked their model so that when they would literally have five paid people show up to your house every day. I don't know how these people do it. But they have 5 people show up to your house and provide that type of support and intervention day long. And there are times when a facility needs to be used, but no child stays there more than 23 hours and 59 minutes. You stabilize, you go to the unit, you get placed back at home, and we're going to send 5 people to your house, and we're going to keep this family together. And so we know that it is possible.
Can I just ask before I jump to Paris, how's your brother?
Unfortunately, my brother right now is incarcerated. When he left the group home, at 18, he was quickly pushed out into a low-level group home because they said he didn't qualify for where he was at anymore because there was no charge for the place that he was actually staying. And when he left, he got arrested for stealing a honey bun and steaks. That's what we're doing to young people. We keep them in facilities. They turn 18 or 21. They age out. And unfortunately, survival sometimes puts you in a very tough situation.
I just want to tell our audience that America has, in terms of the world prison population, 25% of the world prison population in the United States, and we have 5% of the population in the globe. It's just something to think about. Paris, I'd like to ask you the same thing, to paint a picture for us of what you would like to see as an alternative. I want you to go see President Biden. There's this picture once, this wrong metaphor, but you use what you can get, where Elvis Presley met Richard Nixon. Kanye West meets President Trump. I'm sure you're going to get in one day.
Wrong metaphor.
I know, yeah.
Wrong metaphor.
I got it. But my bigger point that I'm trying to failingly make is, you may be, to come back to Sixto's point, you actually have the ability to get into the Oval Office with the President of the United States and paint a picture. And I have to tell you, this town is very reactive. It'll say, we don't want to have, institutions along. They'll say, we don't want to have that. We want to fix this. But I have to tell you, until somebody paints a picture of the alternative, you'll never win. So, I'm interested is when you have that moment, maybe it's a little early, but I'd love to hear what picture you'd like to paint of the alternative to these stories we've been talking.
Well, I agree with Sixto that I think that if there is another family member the children can go to, that's what should happen instead of being put with strangers who are going to abuse them and separate brothers and sisters. I can't imagine going somewhere and not being able to see my brother and sister and to be abused on top of that. But in some cases, some children might not have family, and there needs to be some places, but not these type of places. Right now, they're getting away with it because there is no transparency, there's no accountability, nobody's writing down anything. It's just all hidden. People are acting like they don't know what's happening when they do, because there's a lot of money involved and people are greedy. So I know there are kind and good people in the world, so I wish that there could be where they would hire nice, kind people and not predators and pedophiles and horrible people who are going to abuse children. And I think that even if there was someone who's maybe would have thought of doing something bad, if they knew that they were going to be held accountable for their actions, and they knew that the child could report and tell on them, and everything that's in the Accountability for Congregate Care Act, and children had human rights and could actually say something to their family, say something to someone, that people who worked at these places would be terrified to do anything, because right now they're getting away with it. If a kid is troubled, they're considered liars, they're manipulators. Right. That's what they want people to think, when some of these kids have never even done a bad thing in their life. Maybe their parents did drugs, and because of that, they're now sent somewhere and being abused.
And by the way, they're kids.
Yes, there's kids that are 8 years old being sent to these places.
And I just want to note that in the Bill of Rights, there is a line about, the ability to report mistreatment anonymously without fear of reprisal. Guess what? We have that ability, folks. It is not hard to do that. I'd like to hear what would be in your picture, Caroline.
So I really wanted to speak on this, so thank you for giving me that opportunity. But really what we are wanting to accomplish with this bill is to create that foundational understanding that this is abuse, because as long as we're calling it treatment, we're going to keep sending kids there, right? So the ultimate goal is to reduce the overall usage, because we know that this is inherently abuse. So when we talk about painting that picture of a world without congregate care, states are paying upwards of $16,000 a month to place one child in a congregate care facility. Now, can you imagine if we took that $16,000 and we uplifted a family?
Yeah. Oh, I just want to build
Bobby?
on. Yeah, I just want to build on that, because I think it's a really critical piece around shifting the negative narrative around older foster youth and older youth in general. The only difference between older youth and children is that older youth make bigger mistakes, but that doesn't mean that that can't be settled at home. That doesn't mean that your communities can't fix that issue or help you with that issue. But unfortunately, I think general America, and they just have this terrible narrative around older youth. I've been in stores where they're like, oh, foster youth, they're an issue, and,
right.
and they're worse, and it's not like that. So I think what we could walk away from with today is starting to shift our negative narratives around foster youth and encouraging other people to shift those narratives,
right.
Because youth don't deserve this. Youth deserve unconditional love.
Alan, thank you so much. Alan?
Yeah, just very quickly, we're actually building that vision in Los Angeles. So as you mentioned earlier, I lead an initiative called the Los Angeles County Youth Commission, and it's made up of 15 young people who all have experience in the juvenile justice and the child welfare system. And so one of our core missions is to ensure that every program, every policy, every system that happens and functions in Los Angeles County that serves young people is actually informed now by the lived experiences and by the learned experiences of very same systems involve young people. And so they are 15 young people who are now driving and driving accountability for county departments and having conversations that have never taken place. So imagine, one of the conversations we just had last week was, how can we engage the county coroner's office to ensure that when there is a child fatality, there is a concise process where if this is a homeless or a runaway teen with no familial connections, that we do everything we can to find that young person before calling them Jane Doe or John Doe, right? And so these young people are already driving ideas that'll eventually drive policy, that'll eventually change the narrative, as Bobby mentioned, and the culture. It starts with our young people. We have to center them in this change. We can't continue to talk about systems change for young people. We have to include them in this, or we'll be in the same cycle for the next 5 or 10 or 15 years.
Just as we wrap up, I want to give Sixto and Paris an opportunity to talk to the people online. And I guess the interesting challenge, because I know a lot of the folks in this room, and I would say some of the people in this room are very exposed to this subject. Hello. Others are new to the subject, and I think everyone that listened to the story, that saw Paris's film clip, that heard from each and every one of you, says, okay, what can I do? And that what can I do is hard because it's such a big problem and big challenge. But I just love, Sixto, you to tell not only the folks in this room, but those watching online, if they did want to do something to carry this further, give them some counsel.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm just so deeply inspired by is by Breaking Code Silent and the online movement of very empowering survivors of these experiences to go ahead and post about it, right? And to think before you post, but to be able to post and share their narrative there. I would also say in terms of the bill, right, that we're going to need support to get not just this bill, but there are other bills that are in play right now. There's a bill that's looking at how do we make sure that 100-bed facilities don't get more money from the federal government. Let's do something about that. There's also legislation here around young people having Bill of Rights. I want to say that that table's open and that we need our colleagues and from all different sides of the aisle to be able to innovate and to iterate that so that we can get that all the way past. And so I want to keep those doors open so that we can make sure that we actually get something all the way through. Right now, there is a big movement to literally eliminate unnecessary use of institutional placements. And what we are going to need is for people to care, to people to be able to pick up those phones, to be able to actually listen to us. When we were calling a lot of news outlets telling them that young people on October 1st were going to be homeless, young people who have experienced institutional placements, who didn't get reunited and adopted. We literally had people saying this is not a story until it happens. Why must we wait for tragedy to happen before people can care?
I agree. Before I go to Paris to give her the last word, I'll tell you the one question I have for all of you is, in the book, which I'm so impressed with, and I want to talk to the women who helped put it together. Raise your hand again because it's so impressive. But the 78 people. I just wonder because I think that your stories, sharing your real lived experiences, is so important. Is there a safe place for anonymously? For other folks that have their lived experiences to share them in the internet, in your websites? Is there a place where that is possible?
So the team is about to hate me because they hate when I go off the cuff. But if you email me, we'll put something together for you and we'll go ahead and maybe produce a second report. But we also have a digital youth museum where we have the artifacts. People have written poems. They've drawn pictures of their experience. They've illustrated different things that they've carried with them. Like folks sent in pictures of the one duffel bag that they had their entire childhood to us to describe their experience. And so if you email us at hello@thinkof-us.org, we will do something. We'll put something together to honor that experience and to uplift that.
Oh, thank you. And Paris, I think you have a zillion followers now. But I think, in the broad area of influence, as I said, I'm just interested in, are you in this long, or you have a new partnership here? This is a new crowd for you. And as you talk to those people online now, as you talk to people who follow you, I just love to hear what you would advise them to do. What would you like to expect or hope to counsel folks so that they can be part of this change?
Well, to everyone watching, I think it's all about learning and researching, and you can search it if you search anywhere on social media, hashtag Breaking Code Silence, breakingcodesilence.org. If you are a survivor or you've been through something, if you want to be anonymous, you can write your story on there or use your name. People, if you don't know about this industry, it's all you need to do is press Google and just type in the troubled teen industry and you will see all of the stories. So I think that's one of the most important steps, is for people just to be educated on the situation, because it's something that a lot of people don't talk about, and so many survivors who have been through this are ashamed, but the only people that should be ashamed are the people who work at and run these places.
Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for sharing your stories. I want to thank you for your commitment on this. Sixto, thank you so much. Let's just please thank Caroline Cole, Alan Datcher, Bobby Taylor, Sixto Cancel, and Paris Hilton. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Breaking Code Silence. I want to thank This Is Us. and the Annie A. Casey Foundation, and there's some folks from Annie A. Casey. I love what Annie A. Casey does, and they're out here, and they should wave. Where are the Annie A. They're Annie. I'm sorry, of course. I mean, they used to fund me at New America. Annie A. Casey, Annie E. Casey. Can you tell I've been working since 3 this morning? Anyway, I appreciate all of you, and we're going to see you at the reception as well, and the Eaton Workshop here in Washington, D.C. And thank you to all of you that are online that took the time to learn about these issues and spend the evening with us. Thank you to all of you, and the benefit for those of you who are in this room is we're going to have a reception.
And then we're going to have remarks. We're going to have remarks from the Annie Casey
Foundation. Oh, I'm sorry, I just blew that.
No worries.
I just blew that. Can you tell I have a lot of paper I've been juggling here? Yes, we're going to have Sandra Gasca-Gonzalez and Vanessa Hughes make remarks, and my apologies for just almost messing that up. Come on up. Let's give a big round of applause, and let's escort our panel off. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great, I've got lots of mics now. Just make sure she's excellent. Now let's welcome to the stage Sandra Gasca-Gonzalez. And my apologies. I hope you forgive me. Here we go. Here's the microphone for you. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I just feel like we need to take a deep breath collectively. How about we do that together? And I want to start, first of all, by saying a special thank you to all of the panelists for sharing their heart, and I think we should give them a collective applause of love. I also know what goes into trying to have an event such as this, and I want to thank Sixto Cancel and his team who supports him, and Paris Hilton and her team who support her, because without them, we know this couldn't happen. And this is such an important cause, so let's thank them as well for all the work they've done. I am Sandra Gasca-Gonzalez, and I am a vice president at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and we are a national foundation that focuses on building brighter futures for children, youth, and families across the country. And before I get into the mechanics of what's next in child welfare, we really have to root ourselves in why any of this matters. And it matters because each of us here in this room and watching virtually is committed to seeing children and young people really blossom into successful young adults and adults eventually. You know, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, what do we always hear? The words we always hear is, follow the science. Well, I'll tell you what, I've been following the science on child well-being, and the research is very clear, and we can see with our own eyes, and what we know is that children and young people do best when they grow up in families, when they have stability, love, and support, not facilities. And we have to understand that the answers in transforming child welfare won't strictly come from these buildings that house child protective services or the rooms filled with caseworkers. You, the community, actually have many of the answers and the power to build a movement that will bring a sharper focus to child and family well-being. And I just want to remind everybody that. We heard that tonight, and I just want to remind everybody that it exists. I am really proud to say that the Annie E. Casey Foundation, in partnership with our cousin foundation, Casey Family Programs, we have just launched an effort to eliminate the unnecessary use of group placements, and 22 states have committed to joining us on that journey. This bold journey requires a new way. Imagine if families could get the help they need earlier, closer to home, and without even involving the child welfare system. Imagine if communities found more ways to support one another through churches or mutual aid groups or non-punitive services. You heard a lot about punitive services today. Imagine if we stop confusing poverty with neglect. If we stop associating race with deficits, and we stop separating too many young people from their families. We know that institutions and systems are no replacements for families. Some might call this prevention. I just call it connecting the dots and bringing together all kinds of people like yourselves tonight who have a stake in the success of children and families with minimal intrusion into their lives. And in order to do this, we must prioritize strengthening instead of separating families. Strong families make strong communities. Strong communities make strong families. We must also work across the public, private, and philanthropy sectors to assist the jurisdictions in creating the conditions for thriving families and that so children can be free from harm. And we must also enable this work to be equally driven by the expertise of families, young people, and communities who often know best and do that in partnership with the public systems. Above all else, we must make sure we keep two things in our sights. We need to factor race equity in everything that we do. For young people, families, and communities, yeah, you can clap, amen. For young people, families, and communities to thrive, it is critical to build up each and every young person's strengths, resilience, and opportunities. And we are not talking about equitable access to inequity. Equity within a broken system isn't the answer. Existing systems traumatize families, and they continue a legacy of discrimination, and we have to work to dismantle that. And just as importantly, we need to involve the young people and the families in designing the services and the resources. Learning early from the source is in everyone's interest. Young people, as you saw today, as you heard today, are extraordinary problem solvers, and they are the true experts in their lives, in their needs, and their aspirations. And we need to see them and we need to hear them. Thank you so much for letting me say a few words tonight and for being here.